As Kevin said, I'm on the board, we get to make policy. That's an illusion. We think we get to make policy. You can ask Joel about that. But the hardest job in the American Radio Relay League and in amateur radio is the one he's got and the one he's going to take. We get to go talk and make policy and pass resolutions and, you know, occasionally drink whiskey. But what keeps amateur radio alive, what makes it work, are the section managers. There are only 71. That means we can only find 71 people that are that mentally disturbed who will take the job.
For those of you that don't know, the Yahoo group is known as 71 Suckers.
And the board enjoys that thought, by the way. We don't have to do the work they do. But without, David and I get to see section managers all over the country. We get to see reports on what's happening all over the country. It's not because I was invited here, but I'll tell you the truth. One of the best section managers in the country comes from Oklahoma, and that's Kevin Odell. And we're sorry to see him step down. We're glad that Lloyd's stepping up, but you should be proud of the work that Kevin has done and that you've done with him. It stands out in the United States. Kevin, thank you. And I expect my check for saying that when this is over.
It'll bounce.
Yeah, it probably will. The second toughest job is section emergency coordinator. If you've got a bad SEC, he looks bad. But you've got a very good, where'd Mark? Did you run out?
Right there.
Okay. How difficult that job is difficult to understand until you do it. But if that job is not performed well, when the bell rings and the flags go up and the telephones start coming at 3 a.m., nothing happens. So thank you for your work. As Kevin said, well, not as he said, we just had the centennial. And for those of you who want, you need to start planning for the second centennial. We don't know where it's going to be held yet. This one turned out well. We had very good attendance. And what, Joel, I think the numbers were 3,500. The floor was well attended. We had good exhibitors. But the seminars, the forums were oversubscribed. If you were a board member or you stood still long enough, you were asked to introduce the speakers. There were no forums that were not standing room only. The ones that had the greatest attendance were those on software-defined radio and legislation, which we'll talk about in a minute. In fact, on several of the forums had to be moved to much larger rooms because we exceeded fire code. So that turned out very well. Everyone who came had a good time. W1AW was open for anyone who wanted to operate it. There was never, ever not a line at W1AW to operate it. And people were knocking on the door. In fact, I got an email from someone who literally went by on Sunday morning and was going, he's sitting right here. I couldn't get in. So it went well. It gave a good national image to amateur radio and was well received by everyone. After the centennial, the 30 appointed criminals of the league, the board, showed up and held a board meeting, which produced some interesting results. Yeah, you laugh. One of the things that came up before the board meeting was in response to an editorial published by Mike Corey in the June issue of the QST. Michael got a response. It was more than he thought. The board heard a lot from across the country. That editorial was not well received. How many of y'all saw it? Okay. Okay. It was interpreted, and not without a valid basis, to indicate that ARRL was going to de-emphasize its focus on the importance of emergency communications. It was interpreted to mean that by people who work for public agencies. That was not the league's message. It was one of the prime items we discussed and dealt with. That message was not authorized by the board. It came from inside headquarters. We learned that that message had been spread for some time throughout the country. In fact, I believe there are YouTube videos of where Mr. Corey was standing before a hamfest and said that public safety professionals are insulted when amateur radio says it provides emergency communications backup. Statements were made that MCOM is a made-up term and is not used by professionals. Neither statement is true. And the board made it very clear that those statements in that representation is not going to continue. The board passed a resolution specifically stating that the board and the American Radio Relay League, get my tongue back, I should have had more whiskey, reaffirmed and its commitment to emergency communications, and that it was a prime focus of what the league does. So, in fact, if you look at the CQ magazine for July, they have an editorial on that issue too. But the board has made real clear that what you do, the work you do, is not an insult. It's not an insult to the board, it's not an insult to the league, and is the basis for which we exist. We have the largest allocation of frequencies other than one other group, the United States military. And the reason we have that allocation, one of the principal reasons, is that we are devoted to emergency communications. And the board wanted it made clear to the served agencies, to the government, and to all hams everywhere. That focus remains. We appreciate what you do. So any talk anywhere that we're not going to focus on emergency communications, that we're ashamed of the term, is never going to occur again, or at least should not. If you hear it, let us know. Yes, sir. The other issue that we dealt with was the pending legislation that we've got. How many of y'all heard about it? What do y'all think about it? Bill?
I've heard of it. I've just briefly looked at it. I have not thoroughly read it yet, but it seems to me that if it passes, it will be a good thing. It needs to pass.
The bill is you can call it a private PRB1 bill. All of you are familiar with PRB1, right? For 30 years, give or take a few months, it has stood for the fact that cities, counties, governments must reasonably accommodate any amateur radio operator who wants to put up exterior to their residence antenna systems. You hear different terms: antenna support structures, antennas, antenna systems. To all of us, it means the same thing. The lumen's got to get up in the air, and it's got to stand on something other than Kevin's shoulders. That 30-year interpretation has resulted in multiple federal court cases, multiple hearings before the FCC, and it all comes down to one thing that we always fight over. Anybody tell me what it is? CC&Rs, but what is it they're opposing?
Reasonable accommodation.
No, they're opposing towers. Short version towers. You cut through everything. No one ever fights about having a wire hidden under your eaves. They fight about verticals, but not that much. The court fights and the fights that the league spends money on are fights over towers, either to get it up or, in the Palmdale case, it was to take it down. Before the board meeting, there were, let me back up. PRB1 says that if it passes, it will direct the Federal Communications Commission to, within 120 days, to rewrite its regulations to apply PRB1 regulation to private land use restrictions. And that means homeowners associations, CC&Rs, whatever you want to call them. Were that to be done, that means every homeowner association is going to have to work by the same standards as Oklahoma City. You're going to they will have to reasonably accommodate what you want. Now, I'm an attorney. I'll tell you the hinge on the door to hell is reasonable. You can fight over it, and this reason has been fight for 30 years. But there is a developed body of law and regulations that indicate what reasonable accommodation will mean. So the purpose is to get that bill passed. It's been introduced in the House by a Democrat and a Republican. We did that to make certain everyone understood it's a bipartisan bill. There's no politics in this. There's no politics in amateur radio. We've received so far a pretty good response to the people we're talking to. The biggest problem is they don't know what amateur radio is. The problem that arose before the board meeting was that we learned that some people had been appearing before Congress and representing almost, well, I can't say they're doing a whisper, they're doing a very loud voice, but they were telling congressmen that it's okay. You can support the bill. Because what we really mean by reasonable accommodation and private land use restrictions is hidden wires. Well, Bill's reaction was the polite version of what happened when we heard this. A lot of people managed to hit the stops on that one. If Congress passes a bill with the understanding that it is hidden wires, how many of you have towers? How many of you have verticals? You can take them down. We asked the FCC about a year ago to do a study as to whether or not private land use restrictions adversely impacted amateur radio. We should have known what was coming. The FCC does not like us. We can go into all the reasons why, but they don't. One of the reasons we beat them on BPL badly. Of course, they came back with a study that said, no, they don't adversely affect amateur radio at all. Nor do they limit your ability to provide emergency communications because you have cars. You can talk from your car. The FCC has made clear in 2000 when we filed a petition to ask them to modify PRB1 to apply to private land use restrictions, they weren't going to do it unless Congress told them to do it. And that's the purpose of the bill, to have Congress tell them to do it. The concern was that if Congress thinks it's passing a bill that will only require HOAs to let you have wires, or little short verticals or whatever, that the FCC is going to say thank you very much, and they're going to do just that. Nothing happens in a vacuum. Who opposes amateur radio in residential areas? One of you said it a while ago. At the national and state levels, builders create these restrictions when they form subdivisions. They lobby. In Texas, I can't speak for Oklahoma, Eddie, you might be able to, but in Texas we have builder organizations paying $5,000 a month to selected senators and state reps to support what they want or stop people from like us getting what we want. And Joel, did you ever approve that much money for paying congressmen?
No.
No, because we don't. It's not that Joel wouldn't have done it. The league doesn't have that much money and it does not have a lobbying arm. So we are behind the curve when we are dealing with state legislature or with Congress. But I will tell you that doesn't mean we can't win. Eddie and Kevin did a very good job in the last legislative session getting PRB1 modified in Oklahoma. Montana ended up with a reasonable accommodation interpretation of 100 feet as a matter of right. We can do this. So we can do it even at the congressional level, but we're going to have opposition. CAI, Community Associations, Inc. are already out sending letters to all their organizations going, my God, these people, we're going to have towers. Hell yes, we can. We're going to do it. But the bill is going to be hard fought. If anyone in the room asks, is it going to pass the first time? There's no one in the room from the league, and we can blame it on Joel if we want to, that's going to tell you we will guarantee we can get it the first time. But we're going to try. But the concern is that if Bill's our congressman, and we're going to the bill, and when Eddie and I tell him what we really mean is short verticals and reasonable wires, we may get to talk to Bill. We're probably going to get to talk to his staff member, Kevin. Okay, there's no vacuum up there. Everyone wants to know what we mean by the bill, or any bill. So if Lloyd's representing the CAI, he's going to contact staff members and go, what do those guys really want? And if he's the staff member or the congressman says, well, they just told me wires and short verticals, they're going to go back and tell their people, and they're going to soil their laundry because they've been fighting us over towers for 100 years. The builders do the same thing. They call up staff members going, what did these guys tell you they want? So our concern was that if people were making perhaps a good faith and effort but misunderstanding the consequences, and we're representing that what we would be happy with, short verticals, hidden wires, whatever, that our opponents are going to hear that. So's the FCC. And someone's going to raise their hand and go, guys, let's agree to that interpretation. Because if you show up with an interpretation on the bill attached to a new definition of reasonable accommodation, the fear was, and the reality is, the FCC will change the rules. And that's the reason I said, you won't have towers. You won't have verticals. So one of the items that was discussed at length, there's not a formal resolution of the board because it wasn't necessary. Everyone sat down and discussed this. The board made it clear, we're focusing on PRB1 as it stands. We want what we've got. That means if this bill passes, FCC is directed to apply PRB1 to homeowner associations, call it private land use if you want, but we all know who we're talking about. It means we have the same rights we have against a city. You're going to raise your hand or you're going to throw something?
No.
Okay, just a second. That means that if it were to pass, when you go to an HOA, and I know you don't have that many in Oklahoma, in Texas we're infested with them. There are 33,000 of them. What's so in Arkansas? Well, most of your new subdivisions have HOAs too, don't they? If you build a new subdivision anywhere in the country, it's got land use restrictions and it's got an HOA. And every one of them say the same thing. Some version or another, no amateur radio. Either towers, antennas, they do it different ways. So if this passes, we can get it passed, it will eliminate those restrictions. It doesn't mean you get a 200-foot tower as a matter of right, but it does mean you get a reasonable accommodation. You get to put something up that can work. You're going to receive communications from your section managers. You're going to get it from the league. They're going to ask you to sign letters. Basically, it's going to be a form letter that goes to your congressman, not mine, yours. Mine doesn't care if what someone outside his district thinks. Yours don't care what some guy from Texas thinks either. Probably more so from Texas than anyplace else. They want to hear from constituents. They want to know what you want them to do. So that's the reason we will be asking you to fill out letters and send it to your congressman and your senator. Those letters will have two purposes. One, ask them to co-sponsor the bill. And two, support it when it comes to the floor for a vote. The reason we want co-sponsors is that if it's just Eddie and Kevin running the bill, you got a bunch of guys up there and go, it's not that much support. If the bill comes to the floor and it has 100 backers, it changes the balance. People say, well, there's a lot of support. I don't know anything about it, but I don't want to get in front of that train. We got a better chance. So it's twofold. One, we want your vote. Two, we want you to co-sponsor the bill. We are going to be running training sessions and trying to get people in every state to go see their congressman. If you like politics, anybody like politics? But, and I say this as a joke, but there's an old saying, was it Winston Churchill that said, you may not be interested in war, but war is interested in you. You may not be interested in politics, it's not what we do. But politics, I can assure you, is interested in us. Because all the gold is not in Beverly Hills. All the gold is in the allocation of frequencies to amateur radio. There are people who want that. We have to play politics, we have to pay attention. And if we are to continue to exist with the proliferation of homeowner associations across the country and restrictions, we have to play politics. We have to defend ourselves from further restrictions and fight to remove them. So amateur radio may not, for the past 100 years, been heavily involved in politics, but if we're going to survive, we have to. That doesn't mean each one of you have to, but if you can send us a letter, or send a letter when we ask, that helps. We are 700,000 hams in the country, 164, I think, Joel, current number, in the league. That's a voice worth listening to. Because what they don't know, and what I'll tell you need to make true, is whether we vote. And the most powerful thing we see in the Texas legislature is when we sit down with people and go, look, we've got 50,000 hams in the state of Texas, and I can guarantee you they're going to vote. They go, okay, they'll listen. And we sent out an email in the Texas legislature during the legislature asking all the hams in Texas to send faxes or make phone calls to a particular committee hearing cell phone bills, because they weren't listening to us. We tied up the Capitol telephone system inside of 45 minutes and locked it down for the entire day. I can assure you ever since then, when the amateur radio shows up and goes, we want to talk to you, and we have people who are serious about this and will respond, no one misses that point. They realize we're a potential voter bloc. So the more you participate by just sending a letter or making a phone call. Phone calls are devastating. If you call your congressman, you won't talk to him. You will talk to a staff member. They record those phone calls. I don't mean they record the actual content. They make a note. Joel Harrison called Senator so-and-so, said he's a ham and he's calling about H.R. 4969. They count. They count phone calls, they count faxes, they count letters. And for those of you who think of sending emails, don't. Nobody reads them. They're a waste of time, unless you just want to annoy them. So that's going to be a big push for the rest of the year and in the next year, because Congress is going to shift. You know, elections in November, we'll have a lame duck Congress. We may have to index and start over again. So we cannot win it in a month. We may not win it in a year. It's a continuing fight. But we've got good sponsors. The committee chairman of the House Telecommunications Committee that will hear the bill likes this bill. He wants it to pass. And he's going to be talking privately to the FCC to get it to pass. So anything you do to help helps the future of amateur radio. That $39 membership keeps amateur radio alive. You said it last night in your talk, but I'll tell you, it's a truth everywhere, and we tell everyone where we go. The only reason we have any access to frequencies, because a short little guy with bushy hair in 1917 who was bold enough to play politics and go to Congress and tell them that the Navy Department doesn't get to keep control of all bands. Hiram and his group won, and amateur radio came back alive. The only reason it's survived since then is because of the Amateur Radio League. If the American Radio Relay League did not exist, you would be sitting someplace else doing something else. Amateur radio will be gone in a heartbeat. We're under constant attack. You don't see the General Counsel's report. Since the short time I've been on the board, it's gone from about 25 pages to now about 40 pages. The majority of what we have to fight with at the FCC is someone always wanting a little sliver and another little sliver of a band. The executive committee in which Dr. Woolweaver sits, which runs things between board meetings, used to have a very short agenda. Now it's got about a 45-page agenda, and you can assure yourself 15, all but about 10 pages of it is regulatory matters. We're constantly having to defend or fight applications to get a little bit of sliver of some frequency. It can't be done by volunteers without funding. We've got about a $14, $15 million budget depending on any given year. Every membership is critical. You can always say, I'm not going to do it this year, and maybe you can't, but every little bit counts because we run at a deficit every year. If you look at our budget, and it's public, by the way, anywhere from $500,000 to $1 million of that budget every year is contributions. Not just memberships, it's contributions. So if you take out a membership, we keep indexing further down. And on that note, I will remind you what we said last year when we hear. Dues are going to change. We don't know how much, but come January, we're going to be looking at the due structure. We haven't raised dues in 10 years, 11? Anyone can tell me what the price of gasoline was 10 years ago? Anyone want to tell me what it was in 2008?
$1.59.
Exactly right. And the last time I was filling something up was $3.60 something for regular. Our costs have gone up too. Sending QST goes up. Some don't care if they get QST, some do. It doesn't matter. The educational programs we provide the schools cost us more. The publications that we print to train people to become hams or advance cost more. Nothing is any cheaper. And that's one reason we keep running a deficit every year. We keep eating those costs so that we don't have to pass it through. But we're out of luck. We're out of time. Anyone want to tell me what a fair dues increase is? Oh, come on. Jim? I'll pick on you. What's fair dues increase? Jim? 10? Anybody else?
$1 a month.
That's 12.
I'd say 15%.
Okay. Anybody else?
Make it a whole number so easier to check.
Actually, whole numbers don't work. I can't tell you. There have been discussions for a year and a half, but it'll probably come out in January. Now, here's an inside trick. He is taking membership applications. If it's time for renewal, or you're not quite there, renew it anyway. You'll miss the dues increase. And the best deal that he's got going is a 3-year membership. What is it, 111?
It's $111 for a 3-year membership. You get a handbook. If you renew it out here, you get a handbook, and you're covered from the dues increase for a couple of years.
Yeah, it's a 3-year membership, and whatever dues increase we have, you will miss. Unless you want to make a donation, we'll take it. But seriously, look for your membership. Go renew your membership if you get a chance. There's a lot more that occurred at the board meeting. There's a lot more going on, but we've only got an hour, and I've got to give this back to him. If y'all have questions about any of this, come get me in the hall. I'll be happy to talk to you. Kevin, thank you for the time.
Thank you.
And thank all of you for your support. We appreciate it.